The Cleveland Browns didn't just move on from Jerry Jeudy. They made a decision that feels far more deliberate than a routine roster move. On paper, it can be explained away as a trade, the kind teams make every offseason to reshape their identity. But this one carries a different weight. The timing feels urgent, the return feels unusually low, and the lack of public resistance from inside the organization is almost impossible to ignore. Moves like this don't happen in a vacuum. They happen when something behind the scenes reaches a point where keeping things the same becomes more dangerous than starting over. And in Cleveland, it's starting to look like that breaking point had already been reached long before the trade was ever announced. What makes the situation even more intense is who was caught in the middle of it all. While the headlines focused on inconsistency and underperformance, there was a much bigger story quietly building around Shedeur Sanders, a young quarterback stepping into one of the most demanding environments in sports. For most rookies, the challenge is adjusting to the speed of the NFL. But for Sanders, the challenge may have gone beyond just what happened on the field. There's been growing buzz suggesting that the environment around him wasn't as stable or supportive as it needed to be. Nothing officially confirmed, but enough noise to make people start asking serious questions. And when a franchise quarterback is involved, even the possibility of internal friction is something teams can't afford to ignore. That's why this move feels less like a reaction and more like a correction. Because when you step back and look at everything together, the coaching turnover, the sudden shift in offensive philosophy, and now the removal of a key offensive piece, it begins to paint a picture of an organization trying to reset its foundation. Not tweak it, not adjust it, completely rebuild it. And those kinds of decisions are never random. They come from a belief that something inside the system wasn't just underperforming, it was actively holding the team back. Whether that was chemistry, leadership, or something deeper, Cleveland reached a point where they no longer believed it could be fixed from within. And that's where the real intrigue begins, because this isn't just about why Jerry Jeudy is gone, it's about what Cleveland believes his absence will change. Teams don't make moves like this unless they think it unlocks something bigger, something they haven't been able to access yet. And if they're right, then this trade won't just be remembered as a roster decision. It'll be remembered as the moment Cleveland quietly chose a new direction and removed anything that stood in its way. On the surface, the deal looks simple. Jerry Jeudy heading to the Atlanta Falcons in exchange for a future draft pick. It's the kind of transaction that scrolls across the bottom of the screen and disappears within minutes. But the deeper you look, the harder it is to treat this like just another move. Because when a player with Jeudy's profile, former first-round talent, proven production, still in his prime, is moved without hesitation and without a significant return, it raises a different kind of question. Not why now, but what happened. Teams don't just give away talent unless they've already decided they're done with everything that comes with it. And in this case, Cleveland didn't negotiate like a team trying to maximize value. They acted like a team trying to move on as fast as possible. That urgency is what feels personal. There was no drawn-out process, no public back and forth, no sense that the Browns were weighing options. The decision appeared final long before it became official, and that usually means whatever pushed them to this point wasn't something that showed up overnight. It builds quietly. Missed expectations, small frustrations, moments that don't seem like much on their own but start to stack up over time. Eventually, those moments reach a threshold where the conversation inside the building changes. It stops being about how to fix the situation and starts becoming about whether it's even worth fixing at all. And once a front office crosses that line, the outcome becomes inevitable. What stands out even more is the silence. No strong endorsements from teammates, no internal push to keep him, no signs that anyone in the organization was fighting for a second chance. In the NFL, that kind of silence can be louder than any statement. It suggests that whatever happened behind closed doors had already reshaped how the team viewed the situation. Because when a player still has measurable talent but loses the backing of the locker room or the staff, the decision isn't about ability anymore. It's about alignment. And Cleveland made it clear, without ever saying it directly, that the alignment was gone.
And that's what turns this from a transaction into a statement.
The Browns didn't just trade Jerry Jeudy for a pick, they closed a chapter they no longer believed in. They chose direction over doubt, even if it meant taking less in return. And when a team is willing to do that, it usually means they see something ahead that matters more than anything they're leaving behind. But as straightforward as that sounds, it only leads to a bigger question. If the move was this decisive, what exactly pushed them to make it in the first place? If you only looked at the stat sheet, none of this would make sense. Jerry Jeudy still produced enough to stay in the conversation. Solid reception totals, respectable yardage, the kind of numbers that usually protect a player from this kind of sudden exit. On paper, it paints the picture of a receiver doing his job, adapting through instability, and finding ways to contribute even when the offense around him wasn't consistent. And that's what makes the situation so confusing at first glance, because teams don't typically move on from players who are still putting up numbers unless those numbers are hiding something deeper. And that's exactly where the disconnect starts to show, because production alone doesn't tell you when those plays happened, how they impacted the game, or whether they came when the team actually needed them most. There's a difference between collecting yards and changing outcomes. And in the moments where Cleveland needed someone to step up, third downs, red zone opportunities, momentum-shifting drives, that presence just wasn't there consistently. The most glaring example? Touchdowns, the number that defines a receiver's real impact. And for all the catches and yardage, the scoring simply didn't match the expectations, not even close. In a league where elite receivers can flip a game in a single quarter, that kind of drop-off becomes impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just about the lack of scoring, it was about the timing of it. Because this wasn't happening during a rebuilding year with no expectations. This was happening at a moment when the franchise needed stability, leadership, and reliability from its key players. Instead, what they got felt inconsistent. Drives would stall, opportunities would slip, and slowly the confidence that once surrounded the offense started to fade. When a team begins to question whether its top weapons can deliver in critical moments, the conversation shifts quickly from "how do we build around this" to "can we afford to keep relying on this?" That's when the numbers stop being a defense and start being a distraction, because they no longer answer the question that matters most: did this player make the team better when it counted? And internally, it seems like Cleveland had already made up its mind. The stats may have suggested stability, but the reality told a different story, one that pointed to inconsistency, missed opportunities, and a growing sense that something just wasn't clicking the way it needed to. And once that realization sets in, it doesn't stay contained for long. It spreads, it affects chemistry, and it opens the door to a much bigger issue that goes beyond performance alone. And this is where the conversation shifts from what we can measure to what people have been quietly saying. Because beyond the numbers, beyond the film, there's been a growing buzz around what the atmosphere inside that locker room actually felt like, especially when it came to Shedeur Sanders trying to establish himself. Now, nothing here has been officially confirmed, and it's important to keep that line clear. But when enough reports, insider whispers, and online discussions start pointing in the same direction, it creates a narrative that teams can't just ignore. The suggestion? That the environment around Sanders may not have been as unified as it needed to be for a young quarterback stepping into pressure this intense. Some reports claim there was a noticeable disconnect between key offensive pieces, timing issues that didn't always look accidental, body language that raised eyebrows, and a general sense that things weren't fully aligned on the field. Again, none of this is proven fact, but in the NFL, perception can be just as powerful as reality, especially when it starts affecting confidence and rhythm. For a quarterback, trust is everything. Trust that your receivers will be where they're supposed to be. Trust that the effort matches the moment. And if even a small part of that trust starts to slip, the entire system begins to feel unstable. That's what makes these rumors so significant, not because we know they're true, but because of what they imply if they are. And then there's the more serious layer of speculation. The idea, floated in some circles, that the lack of cohesion wasn't just accidental, but intentional. That certain dynamics inside the offense may have made things harder than they needed to be for Sanders. That instead of building around him, There were moments where it felt like he was being left to figure things out alone. It's a heavy claim, and again, it remains unverified. But even the existence of that conversation is enough to trigger concern inside a front office. Because when a franchise quarterback is involved, teams don't wait around for proof, they react to risk. That's what makes this part of the story so uncomfortable, not because we know exactly what happened, but because we don't, and the uncertainty itself becomes the problem. Cleveland didn't publicly address any of this, didn't confirm or deny, didn't offer explanations. They just made moves, quietly, quickly, and decisively. And when an organization responds like that, it often tells you more than any statements ever could. Because whether the rumors were exaggerated, misunderstood, or closer to the truth than anyone wants to admit, one thing is clear. The Browns reached a point where they no longer felt comfortable keeping things the way they were, and once that decision is made, everything else starts to fall into place, including who stays and who suddenly has to go. But if the locker room felt unstable, the bigger issue may have started above it, because situations like this rarely spiral without something breaking at the leadership level. And in Cleveland, all signs pointed back to Kevin Stefanski. What began as a season filled with cautious optimism slowly turned into confusion, play calling that lacked identity, adjustments that never seemed to come at the right time, and an offense that looked like it was searching for answers it should have already had. It wasn't just about losing games, it was about how those losses were happening. Disjointed drives, miscommunication, and a growing sense that the team wasn't operating on the same page. And when that starts showing up consistently, players notice fast. What made it worse was the feeling that nothing was being corrected in real time. In the NFL, players don't expect perfection, but they do expect direction. They expect clarity. And as the season wore on, that clarity seemed to disappear. The offense didn't evolve, the energy didn't shift, and the same problems kept resurfacing week after week. That's when frustration builds, not just among fans, but inside the locker room itself. Because when players start questioning the system, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. Confidence drops, execution slips, and suddenly what started as a tactical issue becomes a cultural one. For a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, that kind of environment could be especially difficult. Development in the NFL isn't just about talent, it's about structure, support, and consistency. And when the system around you feels unstable, every mistake gets amplified, every misread feels heavier. Instead of growing into the role, you're trying to survive it. And while Sanders never made that frustration public, the circumstances around him told their own story. The lack of rhythm, the stalled drives, the visible disconnect, it all pointed to a system that wasn't functioning the way it needed to. By the time the season ended, the outcome almost felt inevitable. Kevin Stefanski didn't just lose games, he lost momentum, trust, and eventually his position. The organization didn't drag it out, they didn't try to reframe it, they moved on. And what makes the next part so intriguing is where he ended up and who followed him there. Because his next chapter begins with the Atlanta Falcons, and almost immediately he brings back one of the key pieces from the situation that just unraveled, which turns a coaching change into something much more complicated and raises a question that's impossible to ignore. Is this a fresh start, or just a continuation of the same story in a different place? From the outside, it might look like a fresh start, a new city, a new locker room, a clean slate for both Kevin Stefanski and Jerry Jeudy. That's usually how these moves are framed. Talent gets a reset, coaches get a second chance, and everything that went wrong is left behind. But when you look closer at what the Atlanta Falcons are actually doing, it starts to feel less like a reset and more like a gamble. Because instead of separating from a situation that clearly didn't work, they're choosing to recreate parts of it instead and hoping the outcome somehow changes. And that's what analysts are raising eyebrows. Not because either name lacks talent or experience, but because of what they represent together. In Cleveland, this pairing was tied to inconsistency, stalled momentum, and a locker room that never quite found its balance. Now, Atlanta is betting that those issues were circumstantial rather than structural, that a new environment will fix what couldn't be fixed before. And sometimes that works. A different system, different voices, different expectations can unlock something that was buried. But just as often, the same patterns follow the same people, no matter where they go. And that's the risk Atlanta is taking, whether they admit it publicly.
There is also the pressure of expectation. When you bring in familiar pieces, you're not just hoping for improvement, you're expecting redemption. You're expecting that whatever went wrong before will be corrected quickly, visibly, and decisively. And if it's not, the scrutiny hits even harder. Every miscommunication, every quiet performance, every moment that feels even slightly off will immediately draw comparisons to what happened in Cleveland. Because now the context travels with them. The questions don't disappear, they just relocate. And in a league that thrives on narratives, that kind of baggage can become just as heavy as any on-field mistake. Meanwhile, Cleveland is moving in the opposite direction. They're not trying to fix what broke, they're removing it entirely and building something new from the ground up. And that contrast makes Atlanta's decision stand out even more, because while one team is cutting ties to reset its identity, the other is holding on to pieces of the past and betting they can reshape them into something better. It's a bold move, no doubt, but bold doesn't always mean safe. And if history has a way of repeating itself, then the Falcons may be stepping into a situation they thought they were leaving behind without realizing it's already following them. While Atlanta leans into familiarity, Cleveland is doing the exact opposite. They're starting over, and they're doing it with a clear centerpiece, Shedeur Sanders. This isn't a half-step rebuild or a cautious adjustment, it's a full commitment. The kind of shift that signals the organization has made up its mind about who they trust to lead them forward. And once that decision is made in the NFL, everything else begins to fall into place around it. Personnel changes, coaching philosophy, locker room culture, it all starts aligning with one goal: put the quarterback in the best possible position to succeed. What stands out most is how deliberate this reset feels. The pieces that created uncertainty, gone. The voices that didn't align, quietly moved out. And in their place, there's a growing emphasis on cohesion, accountability, and clarity. For a young quarterback, that kind of environment changes everything. Instead of walking into a situation filled with questions, Sanders is now stepping into one with direction. Instead of adapting to chaos, he's being given structure. And in a league where confidence can make or break development, that shift might be the most important move Cleveland has made all offseason. And through all of this, Sanders hasn't needed to say much. He didn't make headlines with frustration, he didn't call out teammates or push for changes publicly. He stayed composed, focused, and patient while everything around him was being evaluated. That kind of response doesn't go unnoticed inside an organization. It builds trust. It reinforces the idea that this is someone you can build around, not just because of talent, but because of how they handle adversity when things aren't going their way. And for Cleveland, that may have been the final confirmation they needed before fully committing to this new direction. Now the message is clear without ever being spoken outright. This is Sanders' team, not eventually, now. The offense, the system, the decisions being made, they all point in one direction. And when a franchise reaches that level of clarity, it changes how everything operates. Players understand their roles, coaches adjust their approach, the entire structure tightens. But a reset like this isn't just about removing what didn't work, it's about proving that what replaces it will. And Cleveland isn't just clearing space, they're preparing to fill it with something entirely different. And this is where the reset turns into something much more aggressive, because Cleveland didn't clear out space just to simplify things, they cleared it to upgrade. The focus now is on giving Shedeur Sanders something he never truly had before, a system and a weapon that are built to work together, not fight against each other. Early reports and projections have already linked the Browns to a high-impact receiver prospect, the kind of player who doesn't just catch passes, but changes how defenses line up. Someone who can stretch the field, win contested moments, and turn routine plays into momentum shifts. And whether it's that specific name or another top-tier addition, the intention is obvious. This offense isn't looking to maintain anymore, it's looking to evolve. But the bigger change isn't just the player, it's the philosophy behind how that player will be used. With influences tied to minds like Todd Monken, the Browns are shifting toward a system that prioritizes pressure on the defense from the first snap to the last. This isn't about conservative play calling or waiting for mistakes, it's about forcing them, attacking weaknesses repeatedly, creating mismatches on purpose, and building an identity where production is expected, not hoped for. That kind of system doesn't just elevate talent, it exposes it. Players either rise to the standard or they get left behind. And after what Cleveland just moved away from, that distinction matters more than ever. For Sanders, this shift could be everything, because instead of operating in an offense that felt reactive and uncertain, he's stepping into one that's designed to amplify his strengths. Quick decisions, confident reads, playmakers who create separation instead of waiting for perfect timing. It reduces hesitation and replaces it with rhythm. And for a quarterback still carving out his place in the league, rhythm is what turns potential into consistency. It's what allows confidence to build week after week instead of resetting after every setback.
What makes this even more interesting is how clearly the message has changed inside the building. The old approach left room for explanation. Missed opportunities could be blamed on miscommunication, inconsistency, or external noise. This new system doesn't allow that. The expectation is simple: produce. And if you don't, there's no confusion about why changes will be made. It's a direct, results-driven mindset that aligns perfectly with everything Cleveland has done so far. They didn't just remove pieces that weren't working, they replaced the entire blueprint. And that's why this moment feels bigger than just adding a new receiver or tweaking the playbook. It's the beginning of a completely different identity, one where every piece is selected with intention, every role is clearly defined, and every performance is measured against a higher standard. Because if this system clicks the way Cleveland believes it will, then what we're watching right now isn't just a rebuild, it's the early stages of something far more dangerous taking shape. This is the moment where everything flips, because what started as a series of quiet changes has now turned into something much bigger, a complete shift in power, identity, and direction. The Cleveland Browns are no longer operating like a team trying to figure itself out. They've made their choice, and every move since has reinforced it. The old structure, built on uncertain chemistry and inconsistent leadership, has been stripped away piece by piece. And in its place, a new hierarchy is forming, one that revolves entirely around clarity, accountability, and a single focal point: Shedeur Sanders. What makes this shift so significant is how quickly the narrative has changed. Not long ago, Sanders was the question mark, young, unproven, surrounded by instability. Now he's the constant, the player the organization is aligning itself around. And when a franchise reaches that level of conviction about a quarterback, it changes how everything else is evaluated. Talent alone isn't enough anymore. Fit matters, attitude matters, execution matters. Players aren't just being judged on what they can do, they're being judged on whether they elevate the system or disrupt it. And that's a completely different standard than what Cleveland was operating under before. At the same time, the players and voices that once held influence are no longer part of the equation. Jerry Jeudy is gone, Kevin Stefanski is gone, and with them goes the version of the Browns that struggled to find alignment when it mattered most. This isn't just turnover, it's intentional removal, the kind that signals the organization has identified exactly what wasn't working and acted on it without hesitation. And in the NFL, that kind of decisiveness can change everything, because it eliminates the gray area. There's no more guessing about direction, no more mixed signals inside the locker room. Everyone knows what this team now is and what it expects to become. And that's where the real danger starts to show, because teams that go through this kind of reset either fall apart completely or come back sharper, faster, and more unified than before. Cleveland is clearly betting on the second outcome. The energy around the team is shifting, the focus is tighter, the message is consistent, and for the first time in a long time, there's a sense that every piece is pulling in the same direction. That's not something you can fake in the NFL. It either exists or it doesn't. which makes the timing of all this almost impossible to ignore. Because just as the distractions disappear, just as the structure solidifies, just as the quarterback steps fully into control, the expectations start rising. And if this new version of the Browns delivers even a fraction of what it's being built to do, then the rest of the league may have underestimated what this reset was really about. It wasn't just change for the sake of change, it was a calculated shift in power, and it may have come at exactly the right time. In the end, this all comes down to one decision, and two completely different futures unfolding because of it. Cleveland chose to move forward, not cautiously, not halfway, but with full commitment. They identified what they believed was holding them back, removed it without hesitation, and built everything around a single vision, centered on Shedeur Sanders. There's no safety net in that kind of move, no fallback plan. It's a declaration that this is the path, and everything else is irrelevant. And in the NFL, that level of clarity can fast-track success or expose you just as quickly. At the same time, the Atlanta Falcons are stepping into a very different reality. They're not tearing things down, they're trying to reshape what already exists. By bringing in Jerry Jeudy and reuniting him with Kevin Stefanski, they're betting that the past doesn't define the future. That whatever went wrong in Cleveland can be corrected, controlled, and ultimately turned into something productive. It's a bold bet, and one that could pay off if the environment truly was the problem. But if it wasn't, if the issues ran deeper than just circumstance, then Atlanta may be walking into the same storm Cleveland just fought its way out of. And that's what makes this moment so compelling, because both teams believe they made the right call. Cleveland believes it just unlocked something bigger by clearing the path for its quarterback. Atlanta believes it just acquired pieces that can elevate its offense. Two perspectives, two strategies, one shared history that connects them both. But the truth won't come from speculation or analysis. It will show up where it always does, on the field, when the results can't be debated. So now the question shifts from what happened to what happens next. If Cleveland's reset works, this won't just be remembered as a roster move, it'll be seen as the turning point where everything finally clicked. And if Atlanta's gamble pays off, it'll rewrite the entire narrative around the players they just brought in. But one thing is certain, both paths can't be right. One team is building towards something real, and the other is about to find out if they've just repeated a mistake they didn't fully understand.